The United States of America has been built on immigration since the beginning, since the founding fathers. According to the Census Bureau, about 47.6 million are foreign-born people. That is about 14% of the U.S. population. However, in recent years, there has been a sharp increase in anti-immigration policies where some negative languages against immigrants, I would say. Many communities are affected and harmful statements have been made, such as some crimes in recent events where people remember court saying immigrants eat our pets, or like the event in Springfield, Ohio. Maybe we saw others like saying Congolese immigrants come from mental institution or prison, or they are sent by their government. So many immigrants now are having some concerns because a lot is happening now where we see with the new president or with the new administration in the office where many deportations are taking place and some cities are experiencing that now. So immigrants who come here in the U.S. looking for safety or opportunities, now they have some questions or some concerns. So today we have a representative, Nima Kulkarni, from District 40. She's a U.S. immigration attorney, and she's from New American Initiative as a nonprofit who deals with this all the time. She will help us understand the current situation and what can be done to support. So welcome, Nima. We are really pleased to have you here in the studio of C4. Welcome. Thank you for being here. So I think many people now, especially immigrants, needs to hear from somebody like you to shed the light for what is going on. So welcome so much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so with this that being said, since the new administration, we saw the spike of ICE raids in many cities. So according to Wall Street Journal, for instance, they say since the day of inauguration, they have about 5,000 arrests across the country, nationwide. So today, I would say many immigrants are wondering who is falling into those categories of people who are targeted, if I would say. Who are, like by definition, if you clarify on that, who are illegal immigrants and who are legal immigrants? Because many people come here in different scenarios. We have refugees, we have asylum seekers. So for somebody who doesn't know anything about it, what would you tell them?
It's a big question.
Yeah.
And I want to start by saying, you know, there's a lot of confusion about our immigration system generally.
Yeah.
I think for people that are not practitioners in U.S. immigration law, there's this sense that it's a very rational system, that it's, you know, tied to our economic policy or family reunification. But in essence, our immigration history and our immigration laws have been designed to keep people out of our country, right? Yeah. Certain groups of people. So for until 1965, nobody from Asia or Africa or South America, from all of those parts of the world were even allowed into the U.S. Okay. And so it is something that people need to understand, that we are historically kind of geared towards keeping immigrants out. There are certain kinds of immigrants that we want, and then there's certain kinds of immigrants that we don't want. That being said, we've seen all of this before, right? Some of the rhetoric that you mentioned has been used, for instance, since the 1790s in this country, that immigrants are criminals, immigrants are here to steal our jobs, they have diseases or they're not mentally fit. Again, since essentially anybody ever wanted to come here, we've been hearing the same rhetoric to try to keep them out. And we've gotten through it, right? The country has made progress despite some of the dark chapters in our history. And I think it's important to remember that now, because not only have we been through those dark chapters, we've been through this exact administration before. And so we've seen a lot of these policies and this kind of shock and awe approach to changes, large-scale changes in our immigration system. And a lot of that was deemed unconstitutional. A lot of it never went into effect. But the point of it is to sow chaos and fear and confusion. And so we all need to just remember where we've been and keep our eyes focused on where we want to be as a country.
With that being said, I needed to ask you, like for many people who've been here, I think many in my audience, they've been here for about 15 years. So some of them were saying they have never seen that. And when we go to the record, we saw like President Obama, there were so many deportations, around 5.6 million were deported. So how was it like when you were growing up? Was it like this, always like this? Or is it because this social media stuff, maybe that aggravated things? So was it always like this? Many immigrants have fear because of those stuff like that?
It's obviously, I think, ramped up a lot more in the past few years. As you mentioned, President Obama deported more people, almost double the number that President Trump did in his first term. And President Biden deported more individuals than President Trump did in his first term. That's not a good thing. I think certainly they need to have priorities. So under both President Obama and President Biden, they focused on certain people that they wanted to remove first, right? Those who had criminal backgrounds, those who were, again, like repeat offenders, who maybe were threats to national security, those who had not been in the U.S. very long and had committed crimes. So they prioritized and used Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Customs and Border Protection to keep dangerous people out of our country. That was their focus. With all of the executive orders that President Trump has already issued, all of those priorities are gone. And so what has happened is, for instance, in the executive order that stopped asylum, that barred asylum seekers, it's classified as an invasion. In the executive order that declares a national emergency at the southern border, he's talking again about military age males coming that are unvetted. He's talking about how there's gangs that have taken over parts of cities, and all of this rhetoric that we know is false, that has been false and became viral, and that was amplified by social media, even though it had no truth to it. And we see that it's made its way into an official policy document issued by the White House. And so that's how dangerous rhetoric is in this age of social media. Of course, that didn't exist when our family first moved to this country. But the laws were still there, right? You know, we still had these enforcement laws focusing essentially on people that were dangerous, people that were criminals. What we did not focus on were people that had been here for a long time, that were working hard, that were trying to, help support their families. For them, we have in the past tried to create a mechanism, right? So if you're here unlawfully, so you don't have any documentation, back in 1986, that was the last time we had anything like an amnesty. You hear that word thrown around a lot, but that was the only real amnesty we've had in recent history under President Reagan, who was a Republican. And it was a bill, a law that was passed, which was bipartisan, Simpson-Mazzoli Act. And Ron Mazzoli was a Kentucky congressman who helped pass that. That allowed the undocumented population at the time, I think it was about 3.5 million, to get on a pathway to apply for their green cards and then, of course, become citizens. So they had to pay a fine. They had to have no criminal history. I think they had to make sure their taxes were paid. And, of course, undocumented individuals do pay taxes, which is also something that people don't realize. But that was the last time that happened. And since then, what we have done decade after decade, every single time Congress has made any kind of budgetary allocation to our immigration system, it is always towards enforcement. It is not to our immigration court system, which now is backlogged about 3.5 million cases. A lot of them are asylum cases, so you're just waiting for years just to get your hearing. And then you've got people that are waiting, of course, who are here through the legal immigration system. So because we have quotas and caps in our employment-based system, for instance, that haven't been updated since 1990. And that was before Google existed, if you can imagine. That's how outdated and unworkable our immigration system is. So when you take all of these executive orders and you say that asylees are invading our country, that there's these roving gangs of immigrants that are taking over cities, that gangs are now classified as terrorists, Take that along with the fact that he's opened up Guantanamo Bay as a migrant detention center. Essentially what you have is an atmosphere in which all immigrants, because you can't look at an immigrant and say, oh, you're undocumented, or you're an asylee, or you're a refugee, or maybe you're a citizen. You can't look at a person and say that. So there is a definite aspect of racial profiling that will attach itself in any enforcement action. But the atmosphere that's been created is one where every immigrant is now cast as a threat to national security. It's dangerous to Americans.
Whether it's legal or illegal, so they are all in the same basket, if I would say.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's the atmosphere. So we will have to see what actually takes effect or is implemented, because several of those executive orders have, of course, been stayed in court already.
Yeah. So coming to that, I think many people, what they want to hear now is about the rights or the laws. You tackle down a little bit about the rights that have to be followed. So what are those rights? Let's put some scenarios here. For instance, somebody who is just in the public places like right now, like what rights do they have when ICE or those departments, when they approach them, like what can they do?
Yeah. And I think, again, it's important to remember our Constitution.
Yes.
It is a very robust document. It is the foundation of our democratic identity. And it protects us all, right? We have constitutional rights regardless of immigration status.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we need to remember is there is our judicial system, and then there is our immigration enforcement system, which is administrative. So it is not a criminal violation for you to be unlawfully present. So if you're in the United States and you don't have a visa, you don't have any documentation proving that you're here lawfully, that's a civil violation, not a criminal violation.
Not criminal. Okay,
We've
that's a good thing.
Built, though, this whole enforcement and detention apparatus around what is essentially a civil violation. And so you can have immigration and customs enforcement detain you without any oversight. So there's no judge that signed off on it. There's no due process. So you don't have a right to an attorney to be appointed to you. You don't have a right to a phone call. You don't have a right to a speedy trial. None of those things attach because it's not criminal. So it's this, quasi legitimate state that we're in where they're treating immigrants who are here unlawfully as criminals. And that's not technically how it should be. So that brings me back to the types of warrants and the rights that immigration and customs enforcement and federal immigration officers may have. A judicial warrant is signed off by a judge, right?
Yeah.
So it will have, in Kentucky, for instance, it'll have Commonwealth of Kentucky or District Court on top of it. It will be signed by a judge. It will have the specific name. It will have the address. It will have the reasons for any kind of entry into a private space, right? So if someone wants to enter your home, or your workplace, even your car, it is that is an extension of your sort of private space,
right? Okay.
As opposed to, let's say, a sidewalk or a public street, right? That's a public space. Your immigration officers are not going to have the right to enter your home. They're not going to have the right to enter your workplace with just an administrative warrant, because administrative warrants don't have any of those things in there. They don't necessarily have to specify your name, have the address right. They don't have to have a reason, because those warrants are based on, well, we think that there might be somebody who's possibly unlawfully present here somewhere. They don't have the specifics. There's no due process standard. There's no legal standard. There's no constitutional standard that an ICE warrant meets. Judicial warrants do. So if you're in public, an ICE officer can be there and they can question you. I mean, they would essentially be looking at you and say, I think you look undocumented. And so one of the other things that's important to add here is the executive order reinstating what's called expedited removal.
Okay.
So expedited removal means you don't even go to immigration court. Typically what happens is if they detain you and they say you're here unlawfully, you get referred to immigration court, which, remember, I mentioned it had 3.5 million
cases
backlogs.
pending.
Yeah. So you would be referred there. Expedited removal essentially means that if you can't convince the officer in front of you that you've been here for 2 years or longer in the United States lawfully, then they can, essentially just detain you and put you in removal.
Deport you without those processes.
Correct.
Oh.
Now, that being said, you don't have to answer any immigration questions. You don't have to provide documentation. If you do choose to answer, you have your green card, you have your parole documents, whatever you've got to prove that you're here lawfully. You can choose to show it to them, but they don't have the right to make you answer any questions. They don't have the right to search you, for instance. And you should say very affirmatively, I want to speak to a lawyer. I don't have to answer your questions. Okay. Things like that. If they're trying to search your person, I don't consent to this search, because they're not authorized to do that. Law enforcement, so if it's a local police officer, if it's LMPD, for instance, will have to have some reason to do it. So right now, they don't have the authority to question you because they think you're undocumented or you're unlawfully present.
Which comes to my attention, like there are some cases somebody were reporting, like they were maybe on a gas station and the ICE officers come to them, hey, we want to talk to you. Do you have documents? So which I believe, like if they just talk to you in that way, because they are not doing with everybody. That's, first of all, racial profile, if I would say. And if they do that, like you mentioning, so you have the right to answer to those questions, or you have right to remain silent.
Yeah.
And if somebody also want to abide with them and can show them their documents, they can do that as well.
Yes.
But if you don't want to, you cannot do that.
Correct. Now, if they say, if they try to detain you, one thing that everybody, just because those priorities are gone, everyone is sort of classed as the same if they're undocumented, even if they've been here for a long time. And, one thing that people also don't understand is that our undocumented population, so you have no status, you did not enter lawfully, so you don't have a visa, you don't have refugee status, asylee status, nothing.
Yeah.
That population has been around 11 to 12 million for over 2 decades.
That's a long time.
Out of that 11 to 12 million, 2/3 of them have been in the country longer than 10 years, and 1/3 of them have been in the country longer than 20 years. So these are not recent arrivals. These are people that are, again, trying to build a life, support their family. They have children and grandchildren potentially that are citizens. They're paying taxes. They're waiting for the day that Congress gives them a way to stay here, like President Reagan did back in 1986.
Yes.
But yeah, it's very important if you're questioned or detained in any way that you stay calm, that you don't provide false information or false documents. You are honest about everything that you answer. You immediately ask for an attorney. And crucially, before any of this happens, so right now, as we're all sort of trying to figure out what everything means, have a plan in place. So make sure that your family, your neighbors, your community understands like where you are, where your documents are, that you know who to call in case if you're being detained, you know where they're going, you have a badge number, you've written down all the information that you can communicate to somebody. You can make sure your kids know who to call in case you find yourself in trouble. Make sure that they know they can go to your neighbor's house, or just have a plan to prepare for the worst. With that
preparation, that means like they can detain you.
They could because of this expedite. Because when you take all of it together, right, especially if they start using local law enforcement to enforce immigration actions, there's no jurisdiction in Kentucky that has any agreements with ICE right now. And so, the most that we've seen is that they have gone to courthouses. And the first round of people most likely are people that already have removal orders against them. Because the capacity to remove millions of people is a lot, right? And we don't have it. We don't have the money to deport everybody. We don't have the people. There's not enough agents to do that. So it is likely that they will try to use local law enforcement to help supplement some of that. there are specific agreements that they have to have because they're supposed to provide training to local law enforcement who are not trained in immigration laws or policies. They have to provide funding because our, police officers are already stretched thin and you're asking them to do more. So who's paying for the extra work and the overtime? Those are all questions right now because it's not happened, certainly not in Kentucky. But it's something that we all, again, need to just prepare for. Given the atmosphere, given the combination of executive orders that we've seen and that, again, we're in week 2, so we should expect more. But always be prepared. So have a plan. And we did this last time as well. Just make sure that you have a plan of action in case the worst happens. Keep a document with you, right?
Yeah, that's my next question. Yeah. Would you keep all your documents with you, like immigration? Like if you have a green card, if you have a passport, you have to always keep that with you.
Yes, and I know a lot of people don't want to carry those with them because they're important documents and you want to keep them safe. But right now, again, because of this expedited removal executive order, I would suggest that you carry your actual green card with you. If you have that, have copies of everything in case you want to hand it to an officer. But make sure that you have it with you. Passport, certainly. If you have a parole document, if you have a receipt notice, for instance, for an asylum case, carry copies of all of that with you. And, if you have been in the U.S. for less than 2 years, carry whatever proof that you have that you've been, how long you've been in the U.S. And if you've been here for longer than 2 years, carry some proof of that.
Yes.
So typically, that might look like a visa. It might look, of course, your green card has your issue date and expiration date.
Yes.
But that could include, utility bills or a mortgage statement or just something, a lease, something that shows
that you're here for
2 years or more, just to avoid, any confusion. I was naturalized when I was 14, so I have a copy of my naturalization certificate in my car because, again, we just don't know the parameters of all of this.
Oh, so what would you advise people who have their documents which are expired? Let's say green card is expired. Some people are like that.
Yes, yeah.
So what would you tell them right now?
I would say get it renewed. If you're eligible for citizenship, get naturalized. That is critical. Because green cards can be revoked, citizenship cannot. That's an important distinction. So you can get your green card revoked. I've had some cases, and we've, of course, heard of cases where for low-level drug possession or something you did 20, 30 years ago, they can come back and revoke your green card because that's within their authority to do. Citizenship is much harder to revoke. You have to have been, a dire threat to national security or, treason. Things like that.
Yeah, that's
very high bars to overcome. So if you're eligible for naturalization, do that now.
Yes.
Apply for citizenship. If you have an expired green card, get that renewal in. You can file online now for both of those. So it's important to get the receipt notice, get that kind of documentation as well. This is not the time to be out and about with expired immigration documentation. So make sure you take steps to renew or, ideally just go ahead and get your citizenship.
And if I ask for people who have asylum cases pending, waiting for their asylum to be approved, to be asylee, there are certain numbers in the community again. So what should they do now? They don't have anything to prove. I think they just have their documents, like green card, maybe a pending application. That's it.
Right.
They don't have something to show, really.
Well, they have the receipt notice. So they should have a receipt notice for when they filed the asylum claim. That is typically all they will have. So they might also have work authorization documents, both of those. But the main document is the pending asylum receipt. And again, there are so many different kinds of documents that a person can show to say they're lawfully here that if you're not a trained official, you're not going to know what any of it means.
Yes.
You don't know what an I-94 is. You don't know what a parole document looks like. You don't know what a receipt notice looks like. And so it's really critical for training to be there if we're going to be talking about any of this. But that receipt notice for a lot of people, that's all they have. And that's true for pending adjustment applications as well, because until you get your green card in hand, all you have is the receipt notice. So it is very important to carry those with you to make sure that they are current, pending. But I think it's equally important to remember that if you don't have a trained official looking at those documents, they may not know what they're looking at. So always be prepared to explain. Have your lawyer on speed dial. Make sure your family and friends know exactly where to go and who to call.
Yeah, I think these are important information that everybody have to keep in mind, and to have a plan to do when they find themselves in those situations. So in your organization, New American Initiative, do you have any cases right now, maybe people who are trying to reach out to you regarding this issue, especially now in these challenging times?
Yeah, so New Americans Initiative, our long-term goal, of course, is the civic engagement of our new Americans in Kentucky. So the goal is essentially to naturalize every eligible immigrant in Kentucky so that they're not renewing their green card. They take that next step and become citizens because citizens can vote. And so if you don't like policies, if you don't like the way things are headed, either nationally, on a state level, or even locally, you don't have a say in our government and in our democracy unless you become a voter. And you cannot vote until you become a citizen. So crucial to become a citizen. It is so important. Once you become a citizen, once you take that oath, you need to register to vote, and then you need to make sure that you're engaged every election cycle. So that is the overarching mission of New Americans. It's nonpartisan. It is really to make sure our foreign-born communities in Kentucky are engaged because this is a representative democracy. It doesn't work without the voters. It doesn't work without their voice. And you can just look at the turnout numbers for people just overall, whether they're New Americans or not. 30% turnout is celebrated as something that's good. And that's low. That's a very low percentage. So think about how decisions are being made and how few people are making those decisions. If you don't participate, then you're stuck with those decisions.
I think which answer my question about many people were just wondering how they can feel at home in this country. Maybe, for instance, when they even get their citizenship, when they get naturalized, they see their country written like in the front page of the certificate or the passport saying you come from this country. And they say, hey, maybe they're trying to remind us we are always refugees. So like that, what would you tell them, like if they want to feel more at home in this country, like the way you were saying they have to participate more to the law and be engaged? I think that can be the answer, right?
Yes, and I think that's you answered your own question because the answer is to be engaged, right? So voting is a bare minimum. Once you become a citizen and you vote every election cycle, that's the bare minimum. I think the rest of the time, when there's not an election, you need to be engaged as well. So you can join a nonprofit board. You can volunteer. New Americans has a lot of volunteer opportunities, as do many nonprofits in Louisville and throughout Kentucky. Be helpful. Just learn who your neighbors are. We also, with all of not just social media, but just the general kind of tendency to not congregate. A lot of us don't know who our neighbors are, so it's important to, help shovel the sidewalk, help rake leaves, just make sure you know who your neighbors are and they know who you are. Small things like that, just engaging on a lot of different levels, small, not large scale. I think help people to understand that they're in their communities. If your kids go to school, join the PTA, be involved on the school board. You can go to Metro Council meetings and see what laws are being made and talk about whether you support them, whether you don't support them there. Because those are all open, right? Public, open meetings. And it is your right to be there and your right to make your voice heard. But there's a lot of other ways to be engaged outside of voting. So, on a piece of paper, if it has your country of birth, take pride in that. Take pride in that. Good, and take pride in the fact that you're also a U.S. citizen. It's only there for information. It is not trying to
to harm you or
remind you,
anything.
right?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. So take pride in your country of birth, and then take pride in your country of citizenship, and engage yourself on whatever level that you can.
Yeah, which comes to my question. You are one of, I think, the first immigrants to become a state representative in the history of Kentucky, I guess. What would you tell someone like young who wants to serve like you did, who wants to be more engaged and maybe serve like you are a state representative?
Yeah, I would say reach out to me for sure. I don't want to be the only one. I don't want to be the. I would like there to be a lot more immigrant and refugee voices in our state legislature, in our local government, on school boards, as judges. You know, there's a lot of different ways to serve in public office. And again, if you're not in the rooms when decisions are made, if you're not making your voice heard in other ways, those decisions are going to be made for you, and you have to live with the impact, right? So I think absolutely get involved in campaigns. You know, in the state legislature, we have something called a PAGE program where we have kids come and they're on the floor and they get to see us when we're voting on bills. It's important to be exposed to some of that, to see it as a career path. Because a lot of times, you know, my parents, when they came, were concerned about making sure we had food on the table and making sure we had an education. So they weren't concerned necessarily about civic engagement. But my dad and my mom were both very aware of the importance of giving back to community. So I learned all of that from them. And so, you know, it was almost inevitable that I would find some way to serve. And I think if you feel that way, you know, already, if you have young people that feel that way, that want to be engaged, there's a lot of ways for them to do it. I would love to help them in that journey. I know there's plenty of others that will help. Just learn. If you want to help volunteer on a campaign, what does it take to run for office? If you want to come and shadow or do an internship, a legislative internship, all of those are opportunities. And then hopefully, of course, we would love to see people run for office, again, on any level, local, state, federal, judicial, because we need to have those voices represented. So I'm hoping, you know, second generation, third generation, once people are settled, they will feel the need and the importance and the urgency of being more civically engaged.
In your district that you represent, you're a representative of District 40. I believe there are some numbers of immigrants. Do you have any collaboration or maybe in the long term strategies to help immigrants in community in your district or in your American nonprofit, New American Initiative? Do you have any strategies to collaborate more with them, maybe to resolve these issues, maybe to assure them that there is help for them?
Yes, of course. And, you know, we're lucky here in Louisville because we have so many resources. We have a lot of nonprofits. We're a welcoming city. So there's a lot of support and enthusiasm and encouragement, especially when it comes to workforce issues, right? We need immigrants. Immigrants built this country. Immigration, net international migration, essentially has accounted for over 80% of our population growth in the U.S. So we wouldn't be the superpower that we are without immigration. And that's why it's important when we update our immigration system to reflect our economic policies and tie it to something rational and common sense, because immigrants are concerned with the same exact issues that everyone else is concerned with, right? You want a good paying job. You want a house, a safe house that you can afford. You want to have a good, solid education for your children. I mean, it's you want to be safe in your community. I mean, everybody wants the same things, right? You want to make sure that if you're sick, you can go to the doctor. Everybody has the same concerns. And so when we start looking at each other as other and being divided by some of this rhetoric, I think it's important to remember that we all want the same thing, and we all need the same things to be able to not just survive, but to thrive anywhere in Kentucky. And that's what we should focus on. We should focus on those kinds of policies and not on looking over here while things like Medicaid are being cut. You know, because that's what's going to happen, where people who earn the most, the 1%, aren't paying taxes the same as the rest of us.
Yes.
Those are the things we should be worried about and not distracted about who is taking over this country and who's the right kind of immigrant.
Yeah, that's a good one. So do you have any message, any final message maybe in these times to assure people? Because I saw even Governor Andy Bashir with the message he sent. He said rights and the laws will be followed, and nobody has to really care about this. Like there's some laws and policies that will be followed. Nobody. So to tell people that they have to feel safe in their neighborhoods. So do you have any message maybe you can tell everyone who is in our audiences as final messages or closing remarks?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing to remember, again, is that we've been in a situation like this before. We have made it through stronger, out of darker situations than this. We have to trust in democracy. We have to trust in our democratic institutions, and we have to trust in each other. It's unfortunate that we don't have more elected officials speaking out about the importance of immigrants to Kentucky, speaking out about how important it is to make them feel welcome, and frankly, how important it is to attract immigrant talent to Kentucky if we're going to compete with neighboring states and with other countries. We need to make sure that that message is sent loud and clear. And unfortunately, because everything is politicized and people are worried about their re-elections, that does not become the message that's seen through or cutting through any of the rhetoric. But it's true. I mean, all of that is true. We will get through this, but we have to make sure our immigrant community makes themselves seen, makes themselves heard, so that we can hold people accountable and we can make sure that we're not just silent or complicit as things are happening, things are escalating even within our own communities. So I think we need to remember that Louisville is a welcoming city, that Kentucky needs immigrants, that we also, the majority of our growth just in our Commonwealth has been due to immigration, that we need to remember who we are as a country and the ideals that we were founded on. And if we do that, and if we stay true to those principles, we'll be fine at the end of 4 years. We just need to look out for each other, protect each other and the most vulnerable among us. And that involves being informed, that involves being engaged, and making sure that you know, at least in your community and your neighborhoods, how can you help? In what ways can you support those who may be more vulnerable than you are? Yes.
Okay, that's really amazing remarks from State Representative Nima Kulkarni and also the CEO of a nonprofit New American Initiative. And I think we will share everything. We will share your nonprofit so that maybe people can reach out to you, and also we will share everything from your office so that they can get the help they need. And we really thank you for stopping by to share these great messages people needed to hear. I think they have some level of comfort right now, knowing their rights, and we will share those pamphlets with their rights so that people may not be scared for those departments, so that they exercise their rights. Thank you so much, Nima.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.